Welcome to Frank Talk, a CFA Society Stanford podcast featuring timely interviews with leading investment and business professionals in accessible, time-friendly episodes. I'm your host, Frank Travers. Want to know where the CFA currently stands as a global brand and, more importantly, where things are going in the future? Well, you're in the right place. We were fortunate to get some time with Margaret Franklin, newly minted CEO of the CFA Institute, so sit back and enjoy. As always, please listen to the important announcements and disclosures following the interview, and please also look for, like, review, and subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now, let's get on with the show. I'm here with Margaret Franklin, the CEO of CFA Institute. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
What's the current state of the CFA? Where are we, and where I'm going to take this to where are we going?
Right. So, I think we're at a pretty interesting inflection point. We have a long and deep history in education, ethics, professional excellence. So the cornerstone of that is really the CFA Charter Program, which is really about developing market professionals. And then the lifelong learning that we do, the thought leadership, building market integrity. So our mission is to lead the investment management profession globally through education, ethics, and professional excellence for the ultimate benefit of society. And that is actually a really interesting time right now. We've seen on the front pages and the business pages the impact of capitalism sort of at extreme, globalization and some stretch there. And in the investment management industry, challenges that I think are short-term headwinds, but the long-term prospects are, I think, quite positive.
What's the vision for the future?
So currently, the gold standard, our biggest brand recognition is through CFA Charter. We can imagine a world, though, where CFA Institute is much more meaningful through the life of an investment professional, and where we can have more impact and influence through our thought leadership, through that lens of the ultimate benefit of society. CFA Institute, it has neutrality. We're not commercially interested in a particular outcome, and we benefit enormously from the multi-stakeholder constituency that we have. We have members from all parts of the world, all parts of the industry, and when we have capitalize on that convening power, when we bring them together to think about very important topics for our industry and ultimately for investors, we're able to bring together people in a way that, frankly, I don't think any other organization is. And so we've, I think, become quite imaginative about how we might be able to capitalize on that and harness that for the future.
Any examples you can share, things you're currently working on?
Yeah, I think one of the most notable examples is our Future of Finance work. This convenes really leading people in the investment business, and we've developed a trilogy of research papers. The first starts with the investment profession of the future. The second is the investment firm of the future. And I think one of our most important ones is our most recent publication, which is the investment professional of the future. And not only is that relevant for people thinking about what does my career trajectory look like, what are the skills and qualifications that I'll need for the future, but also gives employers a really interesting insight into what employees are looking like. So we're at this dynamic period of time where workplace and employee experience is changing regardless of industry. I think we've done a nice job of capturing that in a very forward-looking format in a broader context where there are many disruptions happening in our business.
Yeah. Now, how do you take documents like the ones you just mentioned and just sort of the endeavor itself to the marketplace? Do you do this in the colleges? Do you start at university and you bring it to businesses? Do you start before university and perhaps even sort of break in at the high school level?
Right. So right now, much of that publication, much of that research and work is really directed towards people already in the industry and firms that are already participating in it. Our normal entry point tends to be, when we think about that, developing market professionals and future market professionals, tends to be at the university level. And that has really shifted earlier from what maybe even 10 or 15 years ago was somebody who had 4 to 5 years of experience already in the business. So now we're seeing people taking it up much earlier in university. We are exploring what that looks like from an even earlier perspective. We know that people start to think about their careers in high school. And so if we want to attract the right type of talent to our business, then in a broader, more diverse pool of candidates that, diverse ecosystems are generally thriving ecosystems, then we're really looking at how we can do that even earlier.
It makes sense intuitively if you're going to get people interested, even in just in investment, in business and finance. I think you want to get to them earlier so that when they go to university, they already have an idea that they want to be in that space, as opposed to just talking to people who already, feel that they want to be there. Okay, so how about continuing education? Where's the CFA going to go with that?
Right. So the cornerstone of CFA is really that early foundational CFA charter program. But that is the beginning of somebody's career, generally speaking. So tonight we're going to celebrate the charter holders that have made it through both the program and the work experience. And that is, it's, as you know, it's a real thing to go through. It has its own cult-like experience. But as you also well know, that is really the beginning of what will hopefully be a long and vibrant career. And in our research, we see really two aspects of lifelong learning, of professional learning. First, that on average, most members will experience 6 major shifts in the jobs that they're doing. So you can think about somebody starting out as an analyst, moving to a portfolio manager, to managing teams, from institutional to private wealth. It doesn't take much imagination to think about what those would be. At the same time, the industry is incredibly dynamic. I'm going to bet when we both wrote our exams, for instance, derivatives and alternatives were a fairly light component of the curriculum. Over time, these have now become major
You're aging me here.
I know, they can't see us. We look great. But, alternatives, unique strategies that simply weren't available back then are now really important and common elements of constructing portfolios. And so it's incumbent upon all of us to stay current in addressing the needs, understanding the needs, and then addressing the needs of investors. And so we have a long, rich history of doing that, of providing continuing education. We're very pleased with where our professional learning is headed. We're just in the process of developing a competency-based framework. So what are the types of jobs out there? What are the skills required? And then mapping our curriculum and content into that. And that creates for investment professionals a really neat way to get at what are the skills they need, how do they identify those gaps, and then using our learning, which is not just CFA developed content, but stuff from societies such as like the Stanford Society and third-party materials, to really develop a learning path that makes them ready and primed to have the best chance possible and best success going forward. And again, it's all centers on investor outcomes. So the better educated you are, the more you're steeped in ethics and putting your client's interests first, the more likely you are to have, from a self-interested perspective, a great career, but more importantly, restore trust broadly in the industry.
Sure. So you've been CEO for 90 days now, so you know everything there is to know about the Institute, and you're going to be able to answer every question definitively.
I wish.
What are the challenges? What are the headwinds that you think we're facing right now?
So I think the headwinds are maybe in 2 or 3 buckets. One is the actual market conditions that are proving to be very challenging. We have lower interest rates, in the case of Europe, negative, and Japan, negative interest rates, which creates an interesting conundrum for liabilities, right? Sure. When interest rates come down, liabilities of pension plans or the things we need to fund go up. Lower interest rates create generally a lower return for longer environment. So now our liabilities are up. The ability to earn a significant return is reduced. And frankly, people are living longer. And so that creates an interesting condition for investing. We see polarity in the world. We see disruption in the world. And we see disruption from technology. In the short term, all of those create some cyclical headwinds. That being said, I think the longer term picture is that savings are increasing. We have rising middle class from developing markets. We have all kinds of positive activity that probably creates a much more positive environment for the investment management industry. But it's changing. We have consolidation and compression. We have clients asking about the value for money, and that's going to, I think, make investment professionals and investment firms really have to stand up for the value proposition that they deliver. And I think that advice and investment management is a noble profession and a necessary service. So it behooves us to actually get that right.
So how is the CFA Institute going to take technology? You mentioned technology. It's always a game changer whenever you talk to anybody. Do you have any designs on sort of using technology and evolving the technological aspect of how the CFA is brought to the people?
Right. So we have just hired a new chief information officer who is in the process of assessing and transforming our digital experience. So we know that clients and our members actually want to have a completely different experience. 48% of our members are millennials and they're digital natives. So we are transforming the way we interact with them. We have, I think, a superb team in place to get us there reasonably quick.
Any other trends that you can mention? Sort of, you said 48% of millennials. Is there a different geographical growth or compression sort of within the CFA universe?
So most notably, China is a growing constituent for us. It's an important part of our candidate pipeline. And of course, that makes perfect sense as they emerge really as an economic powerhouse. They have a developing middle class. They have big sovereign wealth funds, big state funds that all need investment professionals to help them manage it. So we see a much more global world, and we have a long history of being in parts of the world where we can help develop market professionals, where we can provide thought leadership, and actually where those markets provide thought leadership back into our core markets, which is developed Western and Western Europe and the Americas. So certainly we see a changing demographic, but the core of what we do, which is to think about how to create returns in a risk-managed perspective, how to understand what clients' needs, construct portfolios to deliver that, develop those strategies that can do that effectively. At the core of it, it hasn't changed. How we do it has.
Let's talk a little bit about the makeup of the CFA membership itself. It's a great segue. We'll talk about women in investing and diversity and inclusion as well. Where are we now and where are we looking to go?
Right. So 5 years ago, myself and Leah Bennett, a board member on CFA Institute's Board of Governors, co-founded the Women in Investment Management Initiative. 5 years ago, we had to provide and or create research to prove that actually having women on investment teams materially improved the risk and return profile, and it was a good thing. Now, common sense sort of prevails there that diversity is a good thing.
Sure.
Any thriving ecosystem has diversity to it, and ours is no different. What's interesting is fast forward 5 years later, and that narrative has really changed. And so we're not talking about proving that having diversity matters to the way you problem solve, the way you try and address the challenges that you're facing or what you're trying to achieve. But in fact, actually employers in particular are looking for, in a really intense and focused way, for tools and strategies to help them build out these teams. For us, it was never actually an issue of fairness. It was really about how do we improve investor outcomes. We knew that when we were constructing teams and we had diverse teams and men and women on the team, that they actually functioned much better. We looked at problems more holistically. We looked at opportunities in a different way for having those different opinions. Diversity inclusion, we started with women in investment management. It's expanded to diversity and inclusion. We have always felt, though, that the universal diversity issue is women. It's 50% of the population. So if you could kind of crack that code, if you could get strategies that really worked, it would yield dividends in other ways. And I think we still really feel that way. There's much work to be done, but it's incredibly positive. It's an owned and shared challenge that I think we will address in meaningful ways. Our numbers haven't changed dramatically since I got my charter in 1997, 19% women, but our pipeline is dramatically changed. It's about 40% women. So we can see the results already of some of those really early efforts.
Do you think we'll see that change in some ways, perhaps with the global reach of the CFA? There are some countries that perhaps there'll be more inclusion. There are some parts of the world that are just a little more inclusive at this point in time.
I think you're right that it'll be a global effort. So I've had the opportunity in the first 90 days to really go to a number of our locations around the world. And it doesn't matter where you go, they're really talking about this, even in jurisdictions that you might be surprised at. And so I think the catalyst and the objective is to have the best teams possible to try and meet the needs of clients in a really effective way. And let's face it, diversification is a basic tenet of portfolio management, and the way we construct our teams is no different. So I'm very optimistic.
My CFA levels 1, 2, and 3. So.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm quite optimistic. I'm quite optimistic about it, but I think it continues to require a fair bit of attention and energy, and so it's quite rewarding and quite uplifting to see how pervasive it is, how intentional it is, and people are grappling with how to do it. So all good.
Well, another area of great focus globally, perhaps more so in Europe and Asia, a little less so here in the U.S., but is certainly gaining steam, is ESG and sustainability. Where does the CFA stand? And again, I'll ask the same question. I've asked it three different ways for three different topics. Where are we today and where are we going?
Yeah. So CFA Institute stand on ESG is, I think, at a great spot. First of all, when you're looking at evaluating securities or capital allocation, you want to manage your risk, right? So right now, we would say the state of affairs is that ESG tends to be fairly focused on the risk management side, where the risks embedded in things like climate change or governance, certain, splitting the chairman and the CEO, dual class reporting shares. So climate change and environmental has just dialed right up and is front and center right now. But we've always had a long history of thinking about these particular issues in the way that they impact portfolios, security selection, asset allocation. In the middle of November, we closed out our applications for the ESG standards group. CFA Institute has a very long and successful history of developing codes and standards that help sort of set the bar for what investment professionals should be doing, most notably our Global Investment Performance Standards, the GIPS, which is performance presentation standards and generally globally accepted, and the standard for which most performance is presented. We're using that same framework to think about the ESG standards. We know that there is a great crying need for a framework to allow investors, both institutional and individual, to be able to evaluate the products that are out there and ensure that they understand the criteria, and it holds managers accountable in a consistent framework to make sure that their products are actually as billed. So we will begin that working group. It'll be, again, a multi-constituent, multi-stakeholder group of experts that will work away on that, and we're quite excited about that.
And well needed. I often joke that if you get 10 people in a room and you ask them to define ESG, you get 15 to 20 different opinions, right. and I think that changes over time.
Right.
So the question is, how do you stay on top of something that is ever evolving?
Right. So our intention with this ESG standard is that we recognize that it will be evolving. So, unlike, for instance, performance presentation standards, which may not change quite as frequently or may not require as much modification with the same frequency, we anticipate that this will definitely require a little more nurturing care and attention throughout. But my own feeling is you're better to start with something that is workable and gets you there, particularly if the process to develop it, create it, and put it out there is a robust one. We know that there's significant market demand for such a thing. And we think we're in a really good position just based on our global nature, the ability to attract people from different parts of the business, and our experience and success in creating standards.
Well, I've exhausted my question list. Is there anything else that you want to just add? And then, then we can call it a day.
Well, I'm really thrilled that you've invited me here. I'm delighted to do the charter ceremonies. It's always a great time when you get shiny new charter holders just starting their careers. So I'm delighted to be here. It's been wonderful to spend time with your board and look at the initiatives that you have on the go that are addressing the needs here in the Stamford community.
Well, thanks. Thanks for coming to the event, and thanks for doing Frank Talk. Appreciate
you.
it. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please support us by subscribing via iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at cfasociety.org/Stamford for information about our continuing education and career programs, and also about our upcoming event calendar. Now let's keep the lawyers happy. All podcast discussions represent the views and opinions of myself and my guests. This podcast in no way constitutes investment advice and is not an offer to buy or sell any products or services.